My name is Justin, and I am a son of God and an addict, and the host of the RECO12 speaker meeting. And thanks to my God, the steps, and the fellowship of other addicts, I am living in the relative happy, joyous, and free that is promised to those living in recovery, and have been very active in the rooms of recovery since September of 2013. Welcome to RECO12. RECO12 is an organization with the mission of learning and sharing the similarities of addiction of all kinds, and gaining and sharing tools and hope from others who are walking a similar path. We come together from all places, faiths, and backgrounds to gain tools and hope from others who are walking a similar path. Speakers from our past meetings have represented many fellowships and identify with addictions with such variety as alcoholism, drugs, food, sex, gambling, theft, codependency, and the anon groups, just to name a few. We invite recovering addicts with at least 1 year sobriety and who are actively working their recovery in their respective fellowships to share their experience, strength, and hope on a live Zoom webinar each Friday at noon Central Time for 20 to 25 minutes. Then we, the live audience, get the opportunity to ask questions of that speaker for another 20 to 25 minutes. If you're hearing this meeting in a recorded podcast form and would like to participate as a live audience member in the future, please go to RECO12.com and submit your email address there to get those weekly emails that go out with the links. RECO12 is a self-supporting service, and we appreciate your help in keeping us working our Step 12 in this manner. We gratefully accept contributions. If you choose to contribute, please see the link that I'll put in the chat of the live meeting or in the show notes of the podcast. We look forward each week to receiving from the light reflected from our speakers. That light inspires hope, meaning, worth, and growth in us, the listening audience. Now, let's introduce our guest speaker today, Paul S., whose topic will be anger versus grief in COVID. And Paul Schulte is a certified drug and alcohol counselor who has also been sober almost 19 years. He received his degree in drug and alcohol addiction treatment from Loyola Marymount University. He completed his clinical hours at the UCLA School of Medicine, where he worked on LGBT addiction studies. He is the author of 2 books on addiction. The first is Paths to Recovery for Gay and Bisexual Addicts, Healing Weary Hearts. And the second is We Agnostics, How William James, father of American psychology, inspired the 12-step movement. And that's kind of how I was introduced to Paul, was through his conversation with Father Bill W., who has also been a guest speaker on this podcast. He talked with him about that book, We Agnostics. Awesome. Now we're going to turn the floor over to Paul for the next 25 minutes or so. Paul, the floor is yours.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, it's great to be here. And thank you so much, Justin. I was thinking about a lot of this, and because as we're coming out of the COVID situation, I feel like the world is full of unresolved, unrecognized grief. And I was looking at a short book that was written, beautiful book by C.S. Lewis, one of the great, the creator of, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and Cats, and wrote beautiful books on sort of common man's spirituality. And he wrote a book called A Grief Observed. And, he had married a younger woman who was 35. She was American, a very well-known poet, a very great notoriety, and had received many awards and was kind of his muse. And of course, I think 3 years into the marriage, she developed terminal breast cancer, and she eventually died. And she was 39, and they were only married 4 years, and he went into a terrible tailspin. And he wrote a book called A Grief Observed. And the first part of the first sentence of the book is, basically, why didn't anyone tell me that grief is so much like fear? And I love that. And in the alcoholic personality, we know so much about that idea of fear as the common, thread that is, torn, it's through our whole, kind of our genetic network of an alcoholic personality. They call it the 1,000 forms of fear. And I have come to believe, I really strongly believe, we don't talk about it enough, that the 12 steps for me is a grieving process. And a grieving process is the relief of fear. And so I truly believe, I've been giving this a lot of thought since I, walked in the rooms, because, I come from a family that's just been torn to shreds and decimated by alcoholism, my father and my brother and my sister, died from complications from alcoholism, and I have 5 more siblings sort of going down the drain, who I have not spoken to in many, many years, and that weighs on me. And so I want to talk about, this idea of grief and fear and what it is and what we can do about it. And as we come out of this pandemic, recognize it. Recognize that this is grief. It is not anger and it is not fear, it's grief. And what can we do about this? And so one of the first things that is recommended, which is very much a part of the 4th step, is the inventory, right? What did I lose, right? What did I lose as I was coming into the rooms? And I think it's a very similar process for us, people in recovery. As we come out of the pandemic, what have we lost? Let me give you some examples for what I lost. A lot of us have unwell mental health because we spent so much time alone, isolated, away from loved ones, without physical touch. I was trapped in Singapore for 2 years. The airport was closed. There was no way in or out. The government's policy toward expatriates was, if you leave, don't come back. And so I finally decided that, I wanted to spend a little time away. And so there's that. We lost time. We lost liberty. We put off so much. We lost exercise because we were so isolated. Everything was closed. There was an aging process for a lot of us. A lot of us aged a lot. Job opportunities. We have 15 million dead people. My sponsor died from long COVID last December, and my sister had complications from this as well. But alcoholism surely didn't help, and so she passed away last year as well. And so what is this grief, and why is it like fear? Right, the fear is that sense of, I lost something. Right, I've lost something. Something's been taken from me. Right, and I'm not going to get it back. Or something that I wanted is never going to materialize. And so particularly with grief, this is part of being human. We fall in love with people, places, things, and ideas. We fall in love with all of these all the time. This is what being human is. And grief is precisely the process of having lost a thing we love. That is life. That is what life is all about. And it's, what am I going to do to pick up the pieces of the things in life that I've lost? In my journey towards sobriety, almost 19 years ago, I lost my career, went down the frickin' drain, my health deteriorated, my mental health deteriorated. I had to get all that back, right? And so let me describe to you some of these really neat ways that C.S. Lewis describes what is this grief. And one of the things that I think that's part of human nature and is part of the sobriety journey as well. And the first one is grief is a trickster. It makes us think that what we lost is not that big of a deal. Human nature. I love that one. Grief is lazy. It hangs around, doesn't want to leave. It does nothing. Right? It's with us when we're shaving, and it's with us when we're folding clothes, and we don't want to fold clothes. We just lie down and sleep in a pile of unfolded clothes. This is what you do during grief. Grief makes me a doubter, right? In the sense that there's no God. To hell with all this BS. I'm not doing any of this. I don't believe in any of this crap. There's nothing out there that's going to respond to my personal appeal. Thy will be done. To hell with you. This makes me really bitter and resentful. Where's my cosmic friend when I need him? This is the human grieving process. So if anything there sounds, remotely, familiar, that is exactly describing grief. It's not a terrible thing. It is grief. Grief makes me leave my body. It's a really fascinating thing. We have so much of that when we have trauma, when we've lost something, when we've lost our health in an accident, or when we've lost a child or a friend, or we've lost something that we've worked for 10 years, like a career. It makes me leave my body because I'm leaving an empty house, and I'm just an observer. And then lastly, grief smothers us. There is a smothering feeling of grief, a sense of being trapped in my body, where I cannot understand what's going on. And I really love those. And if any of that sounds familiar, that's grief. That is not fear. That is not anger. It's grief. And I want to talk a little bit about that, right? So now what are we going to do about this, right? Grief also causes us to like seesaw really rapidly from sort of sickly sweet, vain, self-indulgent, self-pity to, hey, get your act together, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And so there's kind of a pendulum swing. If that's also something that sounds familiar coming out of the pandemic, it's grief. And you know, when we sit back and you know, we understand this terrible thing has happened. It is very likely coming to an end. A lot of people have long COVID, so there's a lot of suffering still. But generally speaking, the virus, as all viruses tend to do, you know, sort of peter out. You know, there's a great book called by a guy called Foley called The Great Pandemic of 1918, a beautiful book. And it's a magisterial bestseller on this. And he said, look at, and he went through the epidemiological, the social, the economic, the historical. And he said, you know, viruses, pandemics last 2 years. They quarantine 40 is, you know, Italian for 40. People stayed inside for 40 days, didn't talk to anybody, didn't touch anybody. It passes, it goes away. It might come back in 5 years or 7 years, but they usually tend to last for 2. The virus fizzles out and it either dies off or becomes a common cold. That's what it's like to be human. And so what do we have, right? We sit back and we realize there is war and there is disease in life. This is what we're seeing all over the world. But we also realize that life is amazing. There are amazing people around. There are magnificent flowers. There's beautiful frosty sunsets. We have to feel those feelings as well. We have to wake up and remember there is beauty all around if we choose to see it, especially, you know, in the rooms of 12-step groups who are designed precisely to help each other. And, you know, we keep these things alongside of us with the knowledge that there is still suffering, there is still grief, but we keep these things side by side. This is part of the game.
Stress and trauma happen inside of the body, which means we can heal them through the body. My name is Luis Mojica. I'm a somatic therapist, nutritionist, and host of the Holistic Life Navigation podcast. Join me each week as I teach you how to release stress and trauma through listening to your body, using nutrition, somatic experiencing, and other holistic practices. You can listen at the Holistic Life Navigation podcast or at holisticlifenavigation.com.
Grief and loss are part of life. And, you know, sometimes, you know, in the rooms we hear, I didn't bargain for this. And my answer to that is, yes, we did. We bargained for it because we choose to stay alive. We choose to, you know, reach out. We choose self-forgetfulness by helping others. We did bargain for this. This is life. Welcome to life, right? And, you know, we hear in the rooms, you know, if life was fair, boy, oh boy, we'd all be in jail. Or, you know, life isn't fair, you know, thank God, right? You know, and things like that, I think are helpful little signposts at this point. And there's something else that I think is important as we, you know, bear witness in sobriety. We want to say, I have skin in this game. I want to stay sober to help somebody else achieve sobriety. I want others to help me achieve sobriety, right? I'm in the game. I'm trying to take this seriously. You know, we are in this kind of, C.S. Lewis calls it, we're kind of in a game of bridge with this higher power, with this he calls it a cosmic being. And there's a big ante in the pot. Stay in the game, right? The stakes are really high. We are playing for every penny. And sometimes we just need to get knocked silly. And I think all of us, without exception, all of us have been knocked silly by this game right now. And what we're trying to do is get back on our feet and gain some perspective to understand that this is a serious game. It's worthy of serious people in sobriety. When we have our dreams, smashed to pieces, we get back in the game. Because why? Because there's so much at stake to help others achieve sobriety and to maintain our own sobriety, and hopefully people we love can join the rooms as well. And getting back in the game is, I think, what a lot of us are doing right now is sort of a restoration of our faith in ourselves, in humanity. There's a lot of darkness out there right now, and I think we're called to have some sort of restoration of faith. And one of the things I love about C.S. Lewis, he was a very devout man. He was Episcopalian, then I think he converted to becoming a Catholic, and he wrote some of the most beautiful, books like the Screwtape Letters and Mere Christianity are some of the most beautiful books even today on common man spirituality. And sometimes he says, what sometimes you got to do? Think of the foulest, cruelest words and call your cosmic being those foulest, cruelest words, right? Think of the most abusive language you can think of and say that to your higher power, because sometimes we need to do this. Where are you? What have you done? Why are you letting this happen? And I think that really, and C.S. Lewis says, say what you think offends that higher power most. I love this. Get it out, right? Have it out with your higher power. I just love that kind of and you know what he does? He compares it to a tomcat. Be like a tomcat with an owner. Hiss and scratch at your owner, and bite him if you can. Bite your higher power if you can, cosmically, in a metaphorical sense. And this anger subsides. We need to recognize the anger. And one of the things that happens so often in with people who are alcoholic, who come from alcoholic homes, we have all this misplaced anger, right? We put our anger on the nearest person. And I think that's a terrible common tragedy of human life, that we get angry at the nearest possible target, and we don't stay angry at the thing that really, right, is the cause of our loss. What is the cause of loss, right? And the cause of our loss is welcome to life. Life is not fair. It rains on the just and the unjust. Everybody is suffering right now. If I want to go in my little self-pity corner, right, and just think about me, and my problems and my isolation and my lack of physical touch of other people, or my lack of exercise or whatever, I'm not going to get anywhere. All of us, the entirety of humanity, has suffered immensely in the last 2 years, and we're coming out of this. And we want to make sure that we deal with the anger, talk about it, express it, name the things we lost, be angry about that, curse out our higher power, and move on. That is exactly what the 12 steps are all about, because I put myself on that step 5 because I need to forgive myself for all the things that I got angry at that were not the cause of my problem, right? They were not the cause of my grief. My grief is I'm human. I belong to humanity. Humanity has gone through a terrible time of suffering, and we're exiting. And as we exit a terrible time of collective suffering, we have collective PTSD. And this causes a lot of misplaced rage and anger, as we see with so many shootings in America as one thing, right? That's all misplaced rage and anger, and look what happened to me, without understanding any context that all of us are going through this. All of us are going through this together. And, some of the beautiful language of even William James, and who I love as one of the great inspirations of the 12-step movement. Bill Wilson was a huge fan of William James and used so much of his work in writing the Big Book. We are all an uncured patient. William James calls it, we are all made of the same clay. All of us are made from the same clay. We are the same uncured patient of this cosmic being. None of us are whole. All of us are a little bit broken. And we're coming out of this pandemic broken. And the steps are a beautiful way to begin the process, right? The powerlessness is, I'm powerless as a human being. I'm made from carbon and calcium and phosphorus and oxygen, and viruses and bacteria affect my body. It affects all of our bodies, and we've just had a terrible pandemic. Now we're exiting, and we want to pick up the pieces. We find, mercy and pity in all of this. We want to have pity for ourselves and some pity for others, and some mercy. The mercy comes from realizing all of us are in this together. We've all endured suffering and grief. All of us have grieved. We help dry each other's tears. That is the point of the 12 steps, the 12th step. We dry each other's tears. We do not leave the wounded behind. This is, the great healing of the 12-step movement. It is not a self-help program. It's a help other program, right? And through that, I realize I'm made of the same clay. I'm just like everybody else. I'm no better. I'm no worse. My pain is not any better or any worse than anybody else's. I lost my sponsor in December. I lost my sister in early part of 2021. I even had a puppy that I got that died of a virus, a couple of months ago. It's life, it's just his life. One of the things I think that I have seen in 18 years, and I've worked with hundreds of guys, I've sponsored dozens and dozens of guys, and I've sponsored people, who've come from horrific, dreadful family circumstances. We are designed to heal. We have an inner healing capacity. It's there. We are all designed to heal, no matter what. To my core, I believe that. I've seen it with my own eyes. And so, the hurt that we have in the grieving process always leads to healing if we want. And that is the question. Do we want healing? And some people don't, right? But in the rooms of 12 steps, we kind of have an insistence on healing, right? We're in these rooms for solutions. We're not looking for problems. We're looking for solutions, right? And we look for some sort of tenderness from this higher power, this cosmic being, right? And somehow the response of this higher power, in my case, I can say, just as I'm sitting here, mercy is returned, and strength is given, and grief is solved. One of the really important things that I've learned about grief over the years is it passes, and I love this analogy, which I think is really central to the 12 steps. Right, is that grief is like an olive in a jar, right? Like a big olive in a small jar is what grief is. It's just this giant thing in the middle that we just can't get rid of. And what healing is the olive doesn't get smaller, the jar gets bigger. Painful memories and scars of abuse, whether it's sexual abuse or physical abuse or emotional abuse or neglect, or all kinds of tragic things that happen to us, as we get into the rooms. Those things don't go away. We grow around them, right? The jar gets bigger. And that's why it's so important to look at those first, 2 pages of the 12th step and the 12 and 12. Those first 2 pages, I always make my sponsees read those first 2 pages. Those first 2 pages tell us this is what it's all about. This is where you read about we become a worker among workers. We're a friend among friends. We're creating a journey toward emotional sobriety, right? And that's what the 12-step program is all about, to make the jar bigger around our grief. Because we can't make the memories go away, but we make the new experiences of watching somebody grow, of watching somebody gain sobriety, of watching somebody become happy, of watching somebody get forgiveness, of watching somebody being forgiven of terrible, terrible, tragic things. And that's the really neat thing, right? The size changes relative to the grief, and we, and what happens is, finally one day we wake up and we start feeling better. And this has been a process for me too. I've started to feel better in the last, few weeks. I had a really bad darkness in me, like a couple of months ago. I was just like, what is wrong? And I was grieving and I didn't know it. And when we don't know we're grieving, we just get angry at the nearest possible thing. And so that's what we want to do, is to name it, identify it, talk about it, wave our fist at a higher power for a little bit, call him the nastiest thing you can, and then get over it and move on. I'm sure the higher power won't be offended. And then one day we wake up and we see a beautiful sunrise. One day we're sitting in our porch and we see a beautiful sunset. A cool breeze comes and it's like, that really felt good. And then what happens is we begin to remember that there were some good times as well during the pandemic. Some of us made some, like, our what was the phrase? Our pandemic buddies. Right? Some of us had new lovers, right? Some of us, I started running. I got in the best shape in like 20 years. I had nothing to do in Singapore, so I ran every day with my dog. I just started running, and I was running for 45 minutes a day. It's the best thing I did in many, many, many years. And so as I continue on my journey, I love one of the phrases, of C.S. Lewis, especially when we're looking for a higher power. He says, by the way, you know what? It says in that thing, that old book, from 2,000 years ago, it says, knock and it shall be, and the door shall be opened. It doesn't say kick the door in. Don't try to kick the door in when you're looking for a higher power. Just knock, right? Don't kick it in. I really like that. And we're asked, knock gently. We make mistakes in meditating, but we still try, right? I make mistakes all the time, but I try to do meditation every day, no matter what. Don't demand God's attention. I don't know if that's going to do very much good. We just sit there and let it happen. I think it's a passive affair. And then what happens is, when we get a sense of more clarity in life, we get those goals and those targets start to reappear. And that's important too in life. Okay, now I got to have goals and targets. Maybe I want to understand better what is my goal in finding a partner, in finding a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or finding a new lover, or having a new career. So many millions of people are rethinking their career paths, and I think this is a good time now to settle down and to focus on career and targets. And because why? Because so many of our old targets and our career paths have been blown away. Everything was blown away. My career, stuff I was doing, I teach in the university, all that went to hell. I do a lot of speaking, that went to hell. I had a global research business. That's been barely hobbling along. I've had to reinvent myself in many different ways. We find new roads to travel on, right? And we imagine the relationships with fellow travelers, and we look at new ways to find it. And the last thing I would say is, grief is human. Welcome to humanity. This is what we signed up for. Don't say, I don't need this. I can't take this. I don't know what to do with this. It's being human. It's staying in the game. And this is precisely what makes us human, because we love a person, place, thing, or idea. And it's been taken away. And a lot of things were taken away during COVID. Now's the time to heal, to focus, to look at goals and targets. Bereavement, right? Bereave. We grieve what we lost. We name it, identify it, write it down. Talk to our sponsors about it. And it's precisely because we experience love that we have grief. Precisely, right? And I love life, and I lost a lot of that in the last 2 years, and now I'm regaining it, and I'm trying to understand, what are my targets, what are my goals, how do I want to improve my body in terms of getting into better shape, or changing my career, or having new friends. I had to pick up my life and pretty much leave because the whole Singapore was just shut down for 2 years, right? That was very isolating. So just in conclusion, I think that this is a great journey. Sobriety is a great journey. I forgot that. A lot of us forgot it, but it's an exciting, great adventure where we are bearing witness to others who want to achieve sobriety, helping them achieve sobriety, staying in the room, staying in the game. There's a lot of money in the pot in front of us, right? It's very high stakes. I decide every day if I want to stay in the game. And right now I pretty much, do want to stay in the game. I'm human. I am made of the same clay as everybody else. Everybody went through what I went through. I went through what everybody else went through. We have a great way to heal. Step 4 and step 5, and the fear inventory is a great thing. Think of it also as a grieving inventory as well. Cross out fear and put grief, and see what comes up. It's really interesting because, as C.S. Lewis said, they are two sides of the same coin. They're almost the same thing. Thanks.
Paul, thank you so much. I've got to admit, when you first gave me this topic and when I was looking over it, I was like, I'm kind of burned out of COVID. Is this going to be any good? But holy cow, you've opened my eyes to so many things that I did not see. And I really appreciate your perspective on it. It's really helped me a ton. And it brought me to, before we move into the Q&A here, it brought me to a quote that I just read about 3 days ago from a guy, his name's Richie Norton. But anyways, he said, accepting that life is insane, that bad things happen to good people, and that you can find the courage to be grateful for the good in every situation and still move forward is hard, even terrifying, but heroic. I think that is something that that really, when you were talking, I was like, man, what was that quote? I got to find that. Thank
Love
you
it.
so much.
Great.
Yeah. So,
love that quote.
Yeah, thank you. So before we get on to the Q&A, do you mind taking just a minute and telling us about your primary fellowship, recovery fellowship that you belong to, and how that helps you in your daily life?
Oh, I'm a garden variety drinker. Vodka cranberry, or vodka with 3 millimeters of cranberry and all vodka and a lot of ice. I still had ice in my drink, so I am not an alcoholic. That's what I always used to say to myself. I was just a very heavy drinker, and I would say that my family has just been torn asunder by alcoholism. My father and mother were both in the Army, and they both had terrible PTSD from their experiences. And so there was all this quiet rage and spoken rage as well in my home. And so when I, got into the rooms, I had to lay out all the abuse that happened to me in my home, and the lost, right? All these things we grieve: lost innocence, lost family unit, a lost sense of continuity and stability and safety in the home. I lost all that. I didn't get that. And so there was a lot of grieving for me when I did my fear inventory, and I really didn't understand the difference. But I think so much of the 12 steps is a grief inventory as much as a fear inventory. I believe that's helped me so much in terms of understanding what was happening to me. And I really I had a great career. very, very good career. And so, I went to, I resigned one day and I went to lunch and I had like 3 bottles of wine with my drinking buddy and I never went back to the office. This is what I did. So unbelievable. It was a really, really good job. And I just walked away from it. And I went back to California. I tried to get my act together. And it took a couple of years, but I got sober in LA. And boy, I can qualify for a lot of programs. That's what they say. If you're 5 years sober and you're not in like 3 different programs, you're in denial. And so, I've struggled with sexuality. I'm gay, and I struggled with a lot of that world of gay, of coming out during the process of AIDS when everybody was dying, and 1 in 5 of my cohort died of a virus. So boy, the gay people know about viruses. Let me tell you right now, 1 in 5 of that generation born, say between 1950 and 1950 and 1970, 1 in 5 of those people died from the virus of the gay people. It was a 20% wipeout, right? And we think about 1% is what happened in COVID, right? And so I had to grieve a lot of that. I had to grieve the loss of my family unit, my father and my brother dying within 2 or 3 years of each other in my late 20s. I just shut down. I didn't grieve. And, the alcoholic personality doesn't want to have emotions, right? That's the last thing we want. I say that the alcoholic is the only creature on earth who would rather die of a terrible, painful alcoholic death than actually have an emotion. Because if I have any emotions, I would die of sadness. And so, the steps allowed me to touch all these emotions that were too hot to handle. That's the beauty of the steps. And so, I got in the rooms. I stayed sober since my first meeting in January of 2004. I haven't had a drink since. And, I guess I'm a lucky one. And I've sponsored like 70 guys. And the miracle of the steps, we should always be having the steps front and center because it's just a miraculous process.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And so many things I identify with. I mean, a phrase I've heard is, when you get into recovery, you start feeling better. You start feeling sadness better, start feeling anger better, start feeling all these different things better that I have suppressed and said, oh, there's an emotion. I'm going to go drink. I'm going to go act out to suppress that emotion. I don't want to feel it. And I love that you brought that grief into this. A reminder to our live audience, if you have questions for our speaker today, please type them in the Q&A link at the bottom of the window. We'll get to those. I've also written a few questions here. And the first one I want to do, you've already touched on just a little bit, but I would love to dig deeper on this. I mean, we do a fear inventory in our step 4. We really look at fears and look at that. And you've talked about how grief and fear, while not being the same thing, are different sides of the same coin. Mm-hmm. Dig a little bit deeper into the concept of a grief inventory for me. What would a grief inventory look like going across the line there with that?
A higher consumption of vegetables may cut your odds of developing depression by as much as 62%. An American Cancer Society study found that women who sit for more than 6 hours a day have a 40% higher death rate. Hi, my name is Maya Acosta, and I'm a health and wellness educator and host of the Healthy Lifestyle Solutions podcast. Join me and the amazing people that I get to talk to as I set out to learn how to improve our quality of life and increase our longevity. You can listen at the Healthy Lifestyle Solutions podcast or at healthylifestylesolutions.org.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'm going to say that I'm going to be a little bit controversial. I'm going to say they're the same thing. I've been giving this a lot of thought. What is the fear that Bill Wilson talks about I believe it's the 12 and 12. It's 2 things. The fear that something we have is going to be taken away. Something that we love is going to get taken away. And that's ultimately grief. Something I love is being stolen from me, or is dying, or is no longer true. A person, place, thing, or idea. My career, my father, my mother, my wife, my husband died of cancer, died in an accident, died at birth. These are grieving processes. And the other part of it is something that I want is not going to be given to me, right? Something that I love, right? The idea of being a good father, being a good husband, being physically able to do work, right? Being able to have a stable home environment for my family. These are things that I love because I want to be a good fill in the blank, a good mother, a good father, a good provider, and it doesn't happen. And I grieve over that. I think those two things of something that I want is not going to be given to me, or something that I have is going to be taken away. Theft. I'm either going to lose it or it's going to be stolen. And in either case, there's a grieving process when something is stolen from me or I lose it. And I think that's a grieving process. And so I don't want to, we're not going to go and rewrite the big book here. I just want to say that grief is something that is critically important to this process. And grieving is something that, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, began to talk about this more in the 70s and the 80s, decades after AA had basically, codified its thinking. But we've learned a lot about grief and grief as a society and grief for soldiers, especially, soldiers returning from Iraq and the Middle East, and Afghanistan. We know so much more about PTSD and co-occurring disorders now than we ever knew before. And I think this is really only in the last 15 years, and how much of grieving is involved in, solving PTSD. And I think, I'm convinced, 90% of people walking into rooms of AA have PTSD. How many people in AA can say in our stories all the time, I was near somebody who died. I was with somebody who overdosed. Somebody in my family died from alcoholism. Somebody beat the shit out of me, either in my home, my partner, or when I was out being an idiot in the middle of the night. These are things that cause PTSD. Most of our stories are like that, right? And so there's a lot of grieving going on here, and I think that I think it's a little added flavor to that step 4 that I think is really important. I just think it's important to do, because if we're not thinking about grieving, it's misplaced anger, and the anger and fear get all mixed up, and we can just start lashing out for reasons we don't understand. And so I think that grief and fear are very, very similar. They're very close cousins.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. It's really clarifying some things in my mind. I've heard this said, and I've even said this before as I'm going through with somebody, going through step 1 on things. Hey, what are some things that you've lost in your life because of your addiction? And we go, hey, maybe I've lost my family, my spouse, my children, lost money, lost jobs, lost self-esteem, self-confidence, whatever, freedom, because of the bonds that I have chosen in my addiction. And I've lost those things. And I've always looked at that as like, aren't you glad that you can get rid of that? Instead of, I mourn, I'm grieving losing those things. And I think that's a really powerful thing. Do you have any additional thoughts on that, that light that just kind of switched on in my head here?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I tend to do that in like step 2. Step 2 is, what happened during the insanity, right? What happened during the insanity of my, journey toward sobriety? And the more I think about it, the grieving process is that step 2, right? What insanity? When you ask your sponsees, write down your insanity. Tell me what you did. Tell me the things that you destroyed because of your insanity. This is what happens, right? Oh, I crashed cars. I alienated my parents. My parents wanted nothing to do with me. I got arrested. I broke my leg, 3 times. I destroyed my health. I wrecked my bank account, on and on, right? That's, I think, where where, step two could be the more I think about it, kind of an interesting place for that grieving. What did I lose in my insanity? Right. Step one is my life is unmanageable. Tell me about the general unmanageability because of drinking. Step two is what did I lose? What grieving do I need to, when I open my eyes to my lunacy, ludicrous, absurd, insane behavior, what did I lose? I lost friends. I lost my self-respect. I lost my self-confidence. I lost jobs. I lost the respect of my parents. I became a thief, liar, liar, chief, thief, right. Right. And even if we padded padded expense accounts, I did a lot of that, these are things that just aren't good. And then three is, okay, now I throw myself at the mercy of the court. This is what happened to me. My sponsor put it really well. He said, step one is this happened. Step two, this happened to me. Step three is, okay, here I'm in front of the court. I'm all yours, right? This happened to me, right? And then I'm all yours. Tell me what's going on here, right? Please help. Right. And then, four is that inventory. And I think that the grief should be sort of kept in mind, I think, generally speaking. But I think if we look at fear and grief as kind of cousins, there's a lot of insight that will pop up when we're doing that. The fear inventory after that sort of the behavior inventory.
Love that, man. My eyes are being opened a lot here. This happened to me in step two, and tell God about it. Yell at him. I love, give him the dirtiest things you can ever think of and scream at him. Tell him how angry you are. It's not going to hurt God. Yeah, our higher powers.
Yeah.
Feelings.
And we do like a tomcat, like scratch and hiss and bite.
And then go, okay, I got that out. Turn my will and my life over to you. Let's go.
Yeah.
Love it. Okay. So Leonard from our live audience asks this, and if you want to read it, you can pull it up on the Q&A there, Paul.
Oh, okay, sure.
But what he says, what do you think about this? Quote, grief feels like fear because fear, in a sense, becomes our reality. If we feel it and believe it, we have just created our own reality. We're in it and don't quite know what to do with it. It's our worst nightmare come true. So what are your thoughts on that, Paul?
Yeah, I think that's a great insight. That happened to me. That's a great insight because that happened to me too. When I got cleaned up and I got sober, I was like, by the way, when I never, like 12 years of drinking a lot of, Cosmopolitans and vodka cranberries, I can tell you a lot. It never once occurred to me that alcohol was a problem. It never once occurred to me. And I had a lot of consequences, including wrecking, a really good career, which I had to it took me 5 years to rebuild. And I was dumbfounded by that. I was just like, how on earth could I have been so oblivious? How could I have been so oblivious? How could I have been so wrong about understanding reality? And that made me very afraid. It's like, okay, what else don't I understand? What else am I getting wrong? What else am I delusional about? What else am I deluded about? I think that's a very good insight from Leonard that for God's sake, what else am I completely missing here if I can't even understand that drinking was my core problem? For God's sake. That really scared me for about a year. I was just like, okay, what else am I completely missing here? Right. I got the wrong song sheet here. I got the song here and then everyone else is singing something different. And I don't know what the hell to look at. And so it's a really good insight. I spent a long time, many, many months, like, holy macaroni, what did I miss? What did I miss in more than a decade of drinking a great deal? I could not even recognize the problem. That's how cunning, baffling, and powerful this disease is.
And thank you for sharing that. And I love the phrase from the big book, more will be revealed. What else am I missing? And that's kind of fairly recent awakening I've had in my own life where, in my step 11 practice, hey, seeking God's will for me and asking, for whatever I need to do. I'm totally paraphrasing and butchering it, but it was brought to my attention, hey, Justin, you need to address your relationship with food. No. And come to find out, I've been totally blind, mostly blind to the fact that, man, I'm a food addict too. And gratefully that more will be revealed has brought me to recognize, okay, well, what do I need to do? And over the past 6 months it's been an additional miraculous thing in my life where the steps are coming true in my life. And, that's such a cool thing.
I get it, man.
To see. Yeah.
Yeah, I lost like 35, 40 pounds like 6 years ago. I had to just change my relationship to food. I used the steps to quit smoking. I used the steps to help me with food. I just started some pretty intensive therapy just actually this last week on some stuff I'm dealing with intimacy and physical relationships and trying to combine intimacy and physical, the physicality of intimacy is something that escapes me. I have a lot of intimacy in my life, but I have difficulty with that in sex because of childhood sexual abuse. And so, yeah, more will be revealed. I love this. We're constantly changing. We're constantly growing, and we have to be open to this. I think it's great. And it was so frightening for me to address my relationship to food like 6 years ago. I was, very heavy. And I lost, 35, 40 pounds, and I've kept it off. And I'm a daily runner now. And that's miraculous considering, what I looked like, 6 years ago. And so, hey, you know what? Good stuff happens, But like someone told me, we stop things and we address things in the order that they will kill us, right? So alcohol and drugs is numero uno. And I tell people in their first year, for God's sakes, don't try to stop smoking. Don't. Save that for year 2 or year 3. Don't try all 3 at the same time, one at a time, right? And I know people with like 40 years sobriety who are, in intensive therapy. That's great. That's what it's called. That's being human.
Thank you so much, man. This has been really good. Oh, we got one more question that came in. Actually, yeah. So Paul, did you ever live in Alaska?
Did I ever live in Alaska? I wish I did, but no, I did not.
All right. So
no, I did not.
Anyways,
I've
Michelle
lived in Hong Kong and I've lived in Singapore.
Awesome. So Michelle just says, thank you for this meeting. It's so helpful and better than therapy. Thank you for your gifts. So she's grateful for that.
Okay.
And then before we close up, do you have any final words of wisdom that you'd like to share with us before we go into the closing reading and closing serenity prayer?
Oh, for me, this whole last year has been just for all of us, just a total, shit show. And I am grateful that I've got, the rooms and sort of step stuff as a kind of a map. And I'm really glad I sort of, have been reflecting on this grief thing. And I've been talking about it in a lot of meetings, and I think it resonates. And by the way, I think that and I talked with Bill Wigmore, Bill W, about our friend in Austin, Texas. Let's not forget something really important. If you look at the early history of these founders in 1935, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, even into like 44, 46, 48. I mean, for 13 years, they were revolutionary experimenters. They were experimenting with everything, right? We need to rediscover that in AA. They were grabbing onto the alcohol and drug councils. They were grabbing onto, Congress. They were grabbing onto psychiatrists and psychologists and working with them. Marty Mann, right, who wrote Women Suffer Too. She was a lesbian. She was a very successful, Madison Avenue executive. And she became one of Bill Wilson and Lois's best friends, and she was just a trailblazer on all of this stuff. We've got to work more closely with psychologists and psychiatrists and drug and alcohol abuse councils and national treatment centers. We have to get these people involved in the AA World Services. And I really believe that we shouldn't go down this sort of a hole of treating the big book like it's some holy scripture, that we really have to revive and renew that sense of adventure and experimentation that caused the early founders to create hundreds of thousands of new members in a very short period of time. AA has been plateauing at around 2 million for a long time. We need to ask ourselves, why is this happening? We need to be more adventurous. Don't forget, in 1968, they said, we don't care who the hell you are. If you want to have a gay meeting, have a gay meeting. Go for it. And leave the gay people alone. Let them have their meeting, right? That was 1968. The guy in the everybody has a right to become a member if they want. And they talked about that guy who, and then someone said, what would the master do? Well, that guy was African-American, cross-dressing heroin addict, right? That's what that guy was. He was from the Chicago group. And that's been documented. And that was like in 1950. For God's sake, we need to open up and really open up the windows and be a lot more radical in how we're addressing a lot of these modern, heavy-duty issues of very powerful drugs that are on the streets now. And people are coming in, with very powerful drugs and very powerful multiple drug uses, and we got to be able to address it and talk about it and to hit it on the head. Because if we're just going to say AA's for alcoholics only, we're not. There's going to be nobody in the rooms. We need to talk about this and have a dialogue and a discussion, right? And if you want to kick out the drug addicts, guess who was like a really bad drug addict? Dr. Bob. Read Dr. Bob's story. He was a drug addict, right? If we didn't allow drug addicts in AA, there would be no co-founder of AA, right? So we need to be careful about the language that we use, right? Dr. Paul, acceptance is the answer to all my questions. Dr. Alcoholic Addict, he was a drug addict. He was not an alcoholic. He was a drug addict. And he got clean in AA in Laguna Beach, California. And he was a medical doctor. My sponsor knew him very well. And so we need to really, I think we need to really open up the windows and the doors and stop treating the big book like it's holy scripture, and to be a lot more open toward the LGBT community and to alternative groups and to new methods. Grief counseling, I think, is really important. Understanding PTSD, right? Understanding bipolar disorder. I wrote a book about this. I wrote a book about a death study of like 150 people who've gone through the UCLA School of Medicine program that I did my internship in. And we looked at how many people died. And the answer is 11. 11 out of 150 died. Something like 7 out of 11 of those people had bipolar disorder. I'm a huge fan. If you don't treat bipolar disorder, nobody's going to get sober who has bipolar disorder that's untreated. You got to treat that first. And so these are the things that I think we need to open up the windows and talk more about, right? I do believe that a spiritual solution is vital, but if we ignore these other issues, we're going to get ourselves in trouble. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Paul. That was a great RECO12 weekly speaker meeting for all addicts and those wanting to learn more about addiction and the recovery therefrom. If we didn't get to your questions, or if you have other questions, you can either go to RECO12.com/forum and join in our group there. We also have a Facebook community that's a private community invite. You can click to it through the website, RECO12.com, or through the emails that I send out and get in there. We'll post questions on those groups and you can answer those questions, ask other questions. And I invite the audience to come back next week. If you have not yet rated and reviewed the podcast in Apple Podcasts, please go do so now. It's a great way to work step 12 in sharing this message with others. And next week, we will be hearing from Esther C., whose topic will be, the program is not about the don'ts, but the do's. And I'm looking forward to it. Now, let's launch off into the rest of our day with the Serenity Prayer with Paul. If you'll lead us in that would be great, Paul.
Yes. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Man, thank you. Keep coming back, everybody. Trudge this happy road with me. Work it. You are worth it. Paul.
Yeah, it's a great journey.
It is.
It's a great journey.
Standing still a moment, carving out this time, reflecting on the landscape of this life of mine. Peaks too high to conquer, streams too wide to cross, troughs too deep to walk through without incurring loss. Yet here I am, still standing tall, despite the rough terrain. One like me survived the storms and walked through wind and rain. Still standing, I will fight the good fight, still searching for glimmers of light, feet still on the ground. I can still be found, standing still.
My wings are torn and tattered, but I know I still can fly. I may not soar unfettered, I may not rise too high.
Recorded in the book of life and bind it with the seal